The holiday season has finally arrived. The decorations are up, and it is time for me to get into the kitchen and start my holiday baking. December is an incredibly busy month for me. I have three very special birthdays in December: my husband, my daughter, and my mother-in-law. So we love to celebrate birthdays, but all being in December, it can mean for quite the chaotic month. So being prepared is my best way to tackle that. The children love to help out with holiday baking, and this year they are even giving some baking as gifts. So I am helping them along with that. Not only are they giving this baking as gifts, but during the holiday season, we also love to gift some holiday baking to our local firefighters, police, and nurses. So this is just the start of holiday baking for me, but it's great to get it started. And today we are starting off making some homemade peanut butter cups. Reese's peanut butter cups are a favorite in the family, but they're also kind of full with garbage. The homemade ones are not full of that garbage, and they just taste so much better. I started off making my peanut butter filling, and I started off with 1 cup of creamy peanut butter, and to that I just mixed in 1 cup of icing sugar as well as 2 teaspoons of salt. And I just mixed that in until it was well combined, and then I'm refrigerating it. Now in a piping bag, although you can also use a Ziploc bag, and you can use a bowl too, this is just a lot easier to clean up in a piping bag. You're going to fill that with some semi-sweet chocolate chips or chocolate chunks. Microwave it on 30-second intervals until it is fully melted. And then you're going to put about a tablespoon in the bottom of a muffin cup. You're going to do that with each one. If you have time, you can chill it in between so it's nice and solid, but you don't have to. And we are also taking about a tablespoon here of the peanut butter, and we're making it into balls, but flattening those balls. Then you're going to put it on top of the chocolate, but make sure they're not going to the edges. Otherwise, you'll see the peanut butter when the peanut butter cups are all done. So you don't want them to really touch the edges. My son was helping me out with this one. He really enjoyed it. He was also very patiently waiting to taste test these to make sure that they are viable as Christmas gifts. So on top of that peanut butter, we are also going to squirt about another tablespoon of chocolate. Now to get it to settle into the edges, I like to give it a little shake. You can also just use a spoon to settle it down, just to make sure that all that chocolate goes straight to the edges and around the peanut butter. After that, you can stick it in your fridge for a couple of hours. I stuck it in my freezer for a half an hour, and they're ready to go. These peanut butter cups are absolutely so delicious and just make such wonderful gifts. You can also do this in the mini muffin tins, and then they make mini peanut butter cups, which are super cute. I do suggest you have a liner here, so if you are going to do it in your muffin tin, you will absolutely need a liner. For this next baking project, we are moving on to some peppermint chocolate brownies. My kids here are absolutely enjoying busting up the candy canes for the top of the brownies. That is probably their favorite activity during this one. So I'm going to be honest, I completely messed up this recipe. The recipe itself is fine. It was my doing of this recipe that completely messed it up, and we ended up with some mushy brownies. And I'll show you that at the end, and I'll explain to you exactly where I messed up. The recipe, however, is perfectly fine. I started off with 12 tablespoons of butter and 1 1/4 cup of chocolate chips, and I melted the cup of chocolate chips with the butter and got it into my bowl. Now, I didn't have any eggs in the house, so as an egg replacer, I used some peach butter. So you can use a fruit puree as an egg replacer. So that's what I did here. And I honestly didn't notice the taste of that in the brownies at all, which was wonderful. To that, I added 3/4 cup of cocoa, half a teaspoon salt, 3/4 cup of sugar, 3/4 cup of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of peppermint extract, and 3/4 cup of flour. And then we just mixed it all together until it was well combined. And then I went ahead and just buttered up a pie dish. So this would typically go in an 8x8 dish. However, I don't have any square dishes in my house. So whenever I'm making brownies or making anything that needs to go in a square dish, it always ends up in a pie plate because that's just how it works out here. So this is going in a pie plate. I know it seems quite different, but if you have an 8x8 dish, that's where this would go. So after I get this into the pie dish, I am just going to smooth it out until it is nice and smooth. Also during this, I have preheated my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And here is where I messed up. Normally on top of these brownies, it calls for a ganache, and I leave that out because I don't think that the brownies need any extra icing sugar or icing or anything like that. I feel like brownies are sweet enough as is. But on top of the ganache or the brownies, it's said to place some white chocolate chips and some broken up candy canes. So the way I messed this up is that I should have done this afterwards and put it on top of the brownies after they were done and just pressed them in, where my daughter and I very liberally added all of the candy canes and chocolate chips before we were baking them. So this is kind of where we messed up here. So ideally after this, after baking it, I would just press it into the brownies as soon as they came out of the oven. So I'm going to redo these brownies, but honestly, they tasted really wonderful. It's just the texture when they came out that the candy canes melted all over the top and created kind of a hard candy layer instead of being pretty and colorful. So that was just a mistake on my part. I was not thinking clearly. So they just didn't come out as proper brownies. You had to spoon them out. So we will be redoing that brownie, but that's fine. That just means that my kids got to enjoy spoonfuls of brownies instead. So definitely learned from my mistake there. The candy canes go on at the end. So after this, we were moving on to my kids' favorite recipe of the day. And this happened to also be my mother's favorite one. So she was also test tasting all of these and she quite enjoyed this one. And this is sugar cookie fudge. So I started off with one 14-ounce can of condensed milk and I got it into my pot. To that, I added 2.5 cups of white chocolate chips, 1.25 cup of sugar cookie mix, and 2 tablespoons of butter. And once they're in my pot, I just go ahead and get them melted. Now, I kind of put in the chocolate chips in batches just so it wasn't one great big lump of melty chocolate chips. And then after that was melted, that's when I added in the sugar cookie mix just so that it would mix in as properly as possible. So once again, you would put this in a 9x9 dish. I do not have a square dish, so it's going in a pie plate. One day I will make it out to a thrift store and remember to pick up a square dish for myself, but that's just something that never comes to mind when I'm in the thrift store because normally I'm in there looking for kids' clothes and such. So one day I'll get one. So on top of that, if you have some Christmas sprinkles, you can go ahead and add sprinkles on top of there. We have birthday sprinkles or unicorn sprinkles, so that's what we're adding on top of this, and I think it made it look really, really pretty. This was so tasty, just that sugar cookie feel into this fudge. It was so lovely. And now that we've done this one, my daughter's very interested in doing all the different types of fudge. So that will be in our future, doing hot chocolate fudge and all the different kinds of fudge. I love that my kids are excited to be in the kitchen and love to cook and bake with me. And my daughter's even taking to doing things like candle making and making lip balm. She's really enjoying being creative in the kitchen. And I absolutely love that. And I love the fact that I get to pass these skills on down to my children. Now we are moving on to another fun one. These are gingerbread truffles. So I started off getting 2.5 cups of gingerbread cookies crushed. So I just threw them in my blender until they became a powder. So I found these gingerbread cookies on Amazon, but your store might carry them as well. They're just the plain regular kind of ginger snap cookies. To this, I added 4 ounces of cream cheese, but in hindsight, it was pretty crumbly, so I might add even just a touch more to this next time I do it. And in that, I also added a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. And then we just got it all mixed together and rolled them up into balls, about a tablespoon worth. Once we had these rolled up into balls, I just went ahead and chilled them in the refrigerator for a little bit, up to 30 minutes. That's just perfect. That just makes sure that the balls are nice and solidified for when we are going to add our chocolate coating on. Baking is such a wonderful activity to get the children interested in. It's something they can be creative with, and they can get messy, and then they get a treat at the end of it, which is always something that they enjoy. So now I'm taking 8 ounces of white chocolate chips, and I'm going to microwave them in the microwave for 30-second intervals, stirring in between to make sure they're nice and melty. And then I'm going to take my cold gingerbread balls and get them into that melted chocolate, get them nicely fully coated, and set them on another baking sheet on top of some parchment paper. I've got some silicone reusable parchment paper here that I'm using. So again, just making sure that those truffles are fully coated with that white chocolate coating. Now, if you wanted this a little bit more festive, you could take some Christmas sprinkles and just press them into the white chocolate so that they stick there. Or you could also just drizzle the chocolate over. That would also look nice, but I do find these truffles a little crumbly. So when they're coated in that chocolate, the chocolate will harden on top of them and it keeps those truffles together really nicely. So after you have your truffles all fully coated with that beautiful chocolate, you're going to go ahead. You can either stick it in your refrigerator for a couple of hours. I stuck it in my freezer for half an hour until that chocolate is really nice and hard. Now, we are obviously not giving these away right away because we are fairly early in baking them. So all of the goodies that I am doing today, I'm just sticking them in Ziploc bags after they're frozen separately so that we can give them away later and they will stay fine, perfectly fine in the freezer until then. Now, this next one that we are moving on to is a fun one, but it is one only for the adults because it is an alcoholic truffle. Now, there's not a lot of alcohol in here. It's 2 tablespoons, but it's in there just the same. So this is an adult-only treat. So we are making some Bailey's truffles. I'm starting off getting a 1/2 cup of heavy cream into a pot, adding 2 tablespoons of Bailey's and 1 tablespoon of butter. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this onto the oven and get it warmed up. And as it's warming up, I'm going to toss in 8 ounces of chocolate chips. And we are just going to stir that around until it's fully melted and fully combined. So you're going to want to stir that constantly until it is nicely combined because you just don't want it to burn at all to the bottom. Now, after that, I'm busting out my pie plate again, and this is because I want it to cool quickly. You can cool it in the pot, it's just going to take a bit longer. So you're going to want to put it in the freezer for at least 2 to 3 hours. And after that, you're going to pull it out and you're going to create these little balls, and you can coat them in some cocoa if you want, but it's not 100% necessary. Now, what you're going to notice is that these could freeze for days and they're still going to be very pliable and very tacky. And that's okay, because we're also going to coat these in chocolate later to make sure that they're nice and hard. So after we get these all rolled up and rolled in our cocoa powder here, I'm going to get it on the parchment paper, and then I'm going to throw it in our freezer. And for me, I put it in the freezer overnight because at this point it was beginning to be the end of the day and I was moving on to dinner. So I didn't really have the time to look after these tonight. So I just left them in the freezer overnight. Now you could move on to the next step right away of covering them in chocolate, but for me, I think they do get to be just a touch harder in the freezer and just a little bit easier to manage. So I think you should put them in the freezer for at least a couple of hours. So I went ahead and melted some more chocolate, again in the microwave in 30-second intervals. And I'm going to get these chocolate balls in there. Now, I did some where I coated them with cocoa, and then I did some where I did not. And the ones that were coated in cocoa came off the parchment paper a heck of a lot better and were actually a little bit easier to handle. These were way more sticky than the ones that were covered in cocoa, so I would suggest covering them in cocoa. You don't have to, but it does make them just a little bit easier to handle during this process. So you're going to roll them in, as much of a ball as you can get it. And then you're just going to coat it in the chocolate. You can see how sticky these are. So yeah, with the ones with the cocos were a little bit better. And they're just so sticky. But that means that these truffles are going to be so ooey gooey. You're going to bite into the nice hard chocolate and get an ooey gooey, lovely Bailey's truffle. So they are going to turn out really well. They're just a bit sticky while you're dealing with them. But you're going to roll it in the chocolate and get it nicely covered. And once again, you're going to get it onto your baking sheet with some parchment paper there. And after you have them all nicely rolled in that chocolate, you're just going to go ahead and stick them into your freezer and let them harden up. And then they are ready to go as gifts. And these just make a beautiful Christmas gift. If you're looking for more homemade gifts or a homemade Christmas, make sure you check out the playlist that I have linked here because I have tons of ideas for you. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you all next time.